Hey there and welcome to this quiet corner of the night. Tonight, we drift back to a world of stone corridors and flickering torchlight. A place where crowns gleamed by day and shadows whispered by dusk. You might imagine grand battles or thunderous trumpets, but that's not our path this evening. Instead, we follow a softer, stranger fear, the one medieval kings carried into their chambers. The one that no sword could fend off the fear of their own healers. So, dim your lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan or let the hum of your room settle around you. If you're nestled in bed, pull your covers a little higher. And if this kind of slow, thoughtful story suits you, perhaps leave a like or a soft comment below, calmly if it feels right. No hurry, no pressure, just the steady unfolding of history, told in whispers. For those of us who find comfort in quiet tales, imagine a royal chamber bathed in the pale glow of candles. The air scented with rosemary and old parchment. A king rests upon his bed of velvet and tapestry. His breath shallow, his pulse a hesitant drumbeat. Outside, the court waits, ministers, guards, courtiers call expecting a miracle or at least a cure, and yet, within those walls, something else stirs doubt, suspicion, the question that lived in every noble's mind: can you trust the one who promises to heal? You might wonder why a man with all the power in a kingdom would tremble at the sight of a healer's cloak. But remember this: in a time before microscopes or certified degrees, medicine was as much art as alchemy. A leech was as likely to bleed a man to death as to bring relief. A potion could soothe a fever or sharpen a blade of betrayal. Kings knew that each remedy carried its own risk, that each whispered prayer to St. Luke might be answered, or mocked by silence. Tonight, we begin our journey not with a clash of steel, but with a pour of oil and a silent vow: no haste. We'll trace the steps of those who tended royal wounds, and of those who feared the very hands meant to help them. We'll hear the soft scrape of a quill across parchment, recording prescriptions and secrets alike. We'll feel the weight of a physician's bag, heavy not just with herbs, but with hidden intentions. Before we wander deeper, let me know. Where are you watching from? Are you tucked away in a quiet bedroom? Or curling up in a favorite armchair? Share a gentle greeting, no need for fanfare, just enough to let us know this story has a companion in you. In a moment, we'll slip through stone archways and into candlelit chambers. We'll meet kings whose voices shook more at the promise of a cure than at the roar of an invading army. We'll consider what it means to trust someone else with your life, especially when that someone wears a merciful smile, and perhaps a concealed dagger of intention. So, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, let the lamp glow softly beside you. Let the hush of history lull your thoughts, and when you're ready, we'll step quietly into the first chapter of Fear and Faith, the story of how medieval kings learned that no crown could protect them from the uncertainty of healing. Only like, only comment, only brief, and let this tale settle like mist in your mind. Tonight, we explore why medieval kings feared their own doctors. Tonight, you step lightly through the folds of time, as though passing between curtains in a quiet theater. The world you leave behind, the hum of electronics, the steady glow of streetlights, fades, replaced by torchlit corridors and the distant murmur of unseen courtiers. A chill brushes your skin, and you realize the air here carries memory: the damp of stone walls, the faint tingle of incense, the warmth of iron tools laid out on oaken trays. You find yourself standing just beyond a carved archway. Behind you, the roar of modern life is silent. Ahead, a king waits, his figure half hidden in shadow, his breath uneven, as if he suspects he might not draw another. He is surrounded by the hush of anticipation, cloaked figures shifting on flagstone floors, the soft scrape of leather pouches opening, the gentle clink of glass vials. And you are both guest and witness in this solemn ritual. Take a moment to notice the small details. The chamber's flagstones are worn smooth by countless rushes of silk and boots. Moss creeps between the stones near the hearth, where embers glow low, casting a flicker of orange across the high walls. Above, tapestries embroidered with lion and griffon sag slightly in the draught. Their colors dull, but the stories they depict still vivid: battles, coronations, triumphs, and tragedies eternal. Now, draw a slow breath, matching the king's measured inhale. Feel how the air tastes of ash and lavender, of old parchment and crushed lime. Notice how his chest rises, hesitates, then falls in a quiet confession of weakness. For all his grand titles, majesty, sovereign, lord of the realm, care he is merely a man, bound by flesh and blood, waiting for relief. You might expect a physician's entrance to be heralded by trumpets or proclamations. But instead, it is the soft click of a latch and the gentle creak of a door swinging open. The healer arrives draped in a heavy cloak, hood drawn low, eyes unseen behind the flicker of flame. In one hand, he carries a slender rod tipped with silver. In the other, a leather satchel that holds more hope than steel. You stand beside the king's bedside, so close you can see the faint tremor in his fingers as he reaches for the hem of the bed over. The physician steps forward, each footfall quiet upon the floor. He pauses, not out of hesitation, but out of respect, for life, for death, for the vast gulf between the two. Then, kneeling on a velvet cushion, he gently lifts the king's wrist, reading the pulse like a sacred text. Can you sense the tension humming in the room? A soft thread of expectation pulls tight around every spine. The courtiers remain motionless, as though any sudden move might shatter the fragile promise of healing. Outside the chamber, guards stand in carved niches, their breath plumed like smoke, waiting for any sign, the rise of a hand, a gasp, a whisper. But in this moment, time seems to pause, the candlelight wavers, and you feel the weight of the ritual, as if the very air is charged with unseen currents. The physician closes his eyes, listening not just to the pulse, but to the quiet symphony of the king's body, the gentle drumming of blood, the soft sigh of muscle, the rhythmic whisper of breath passing through constrained lungs. You might imagine that medicine in this age was rude, rule even, to modern senses. And yet, here, surrounded by candle smoke and the low chant of a distant chapel bell, it feels more like poetry. Each gesture is deliberate, the placement of a poultice, the measured sprinkle of powder, the quiet incantation of a prayer. The physician's hands move with careful precision, as though he communes with a hidden force, coaxing relief from roots and metals and long-forgotten lore. Feel how the king whines as a linen cloth damp with herbal infusion presses against his brow. The porter of that cloth hesitates, seeing the flash of pain, then tightens his grip, reminding the monarch that relief often arrives wrapped in discomfort. And in that moment, you sense a deeper truth: to be healed is to yield control of one's body, one's dignity, one's faith. Now, imagine the hollow clink as the physician places a shallow bowl beneath the king's arm. A single careful prise releases a ribbon of blood that blossoms dark and sticky against white porcelain. The leech of that ancient practice bites twice more, each drop collected like a prayer for balance restored. The courtiers breathe more openly now, but only slightly, for fear still coils in their hearts. They have seen too many cures turn to curses, too many healers turn to executioners in the blink of a wrong diagnosis. As the bowl fills, the king's hand trembles. You can almost taste the copper tongue of fear in the room. Will this be the time the ritual works, or the time it fails? The physician's cloak brushes against the king's arm as he leans back to observe. He murmurs words that seem neither wholly Latin nor fully vernacular, an incantation, a formula, a plea you cannot fully understand, and yet you feel its weight. Knowledge, after all, was a double-edged sword in these halls. It healed the body, but it also tempted the mind toward suspicion. Now, close your eyes for a moment and let the soft sounds wash over you, the drip of blood into the bowl, the hiss of steam rising from a nearby cauldron, the low, steady chant of a monk offering prayer beyond the curtain. Feel your own pulse. Let it slow, matching the king's. Let the warmth of the fire seep through the stone floor into your bones. Let the rhythmic breathing of the court become a lullaby. When you open your eyes again, the physician moves to his satchel, removing a small vial corked with wax. Inside, a delicate amber oil swirls, saffron, perhaps, or rue, or something more arcane. He uncorks it with ritual care and tilts it into a spoon carved of bone. The oil liquefies, its surface gleaming like molten sunlight. The king's lips part, and with a slight tremor, he drinks. You hear a faint gulp, a tiny protest, then silence. Silence is not absence, it is the crucible of expectation. And here, in the hush that follows, every heartbeat echoes like thunder. The courtiers lean forward, the guard shifts his sword, the monk's chant halts mid-psalm. Even the candles flicker in anticipation. You stand witness to this delicate dance of hope and fear. The physician gently lays a hand atop the king's chest, feeling for warmth returning, for life rekindled. A single bead of sweat slips down the monarch's temple, and in that drop, you see centuries of doubt. For all his power, he depends on a stranger's skill. For all his gold, he pays with his very life. And then, a breath, shallow at first, then deeper. Color flares in the king's cheeks. His fingers relax around the velvet sheet. The physician inclines his head, ever so slightly, a nod both of relief and of triumph. A smile, hidden in shadow, plays upon his lips. The bowl of blood is set aside. The vial is corked once more. The The room exhales. In that moment, you feel a shift, a gentle release of the tension that bound every soul in the chamber. The guards lower their shoulders, the courtiers' faces soften, the monk resumes his chant. But now it rings with gratitude instead of supplication. And you have seen the ritual complete its cycle: despair, ritual, doubt, then fragile relief. Before you step back through time's curtain, take one last look. Notice how the king closes his eyes. Not in fear, but in tired acceptance. Notice how the physician gathers his tools with solemn care, as though mindful of the power they hold. Notice the lingering haze of incense and oil, weaving through torchlight like a silent benediction. And as you drift back to your own world, back to the hum of streetlights and the glow of screens, carry this moment with you. Remember the hush of that chamber, the weight of that ritual, the tremor of hope in every breath. For in that quiet ceremony, you glimpsed a truth as old as humanity: that healing is never just a matter of skill, but of trust. And that trust, once given, binds us across centuries, linking your world to the one that slept under candlelight in fear. Now, let your own breath slow, let your heart settle, and when you are ready, we will step together into the next chapter, where blood met betrayal, and kings discovered that sometimes the greatest threat wore the humble cloak of a healer. In candlelit sanctuaries of stone and shadow, the ritual of bloodletting began not with violence, but with fragile hope. Imagine the medieval king reclining upon silken cushions, gilt and velvet cushioning his weight, yet offering him no comfort. Around him, the soft rustle of silk and the muted shuffle of attendants filled the chamber. A single brazier glowed at the far end, its embers breathing warmth into the chill air. Here, the physician, cloaked in embroidered robes spattered with tinctures and poultices, prepared his instruments, each one a silent promise of relief, or a harbinger of betrayal. Take a moment to feel the hush that falls when a blade is drawn. The king's pulse thrums beneath the linen sheet, a deep drum of expectation. Courtiers lean forward, their breath held as though any sigh might shatter the delicate balance between life and death. The physician's fingers hover over a silver lancet, its tip catching the flicker of firelight. He offers the king his wrist. The monarch extends his arm with the solemn grace of ritual, knowing that in a moment, royal blood will spill into a porcelain bowl. The first incision is almost tender. A thin ribbon of dark life seeps out, lingering on the lancet's edge before dripping into the waiting vessel. Each drop is an echo of fear, a quiet confession of vulnerability. As the blood flows, you sense how this practice was believed to purge excess humors, madness, malady, mentally restoring balance to body and mind. Yet, for the king, it also became a stark reminder even the most exalted life could be measured in milliliters of blood. Now imagine the courtiers' faces. Some were drawn with worry, lips pressed thin, brows furrowed. Others were masks of calm, for in this world, the display of panic was worse than the illness itself. The physician works steadily, his hands unwavering. He murmurs words, half prayer, half prescription, invoking saints, stars, and the hidden currents of the body. Each phrase is a charm against despair by St. Luke. I bind this fever, by the moon's pale phase, I call balance restored. Feel the tension coil and uncoil in the chamber as more blood is released. The physician reclines the king's arm slightly, adjusting the angle so that veins bleed fully. A faint clink marks the moment the bowl is replaced, and another is brought forward, its time lined with leeches. Tiny vessels of ancient medicine, the leeches are placed gently upon the arm, their suckers opening like delicate blossoms. You might shiver at the thought, but the king greets them with stoic resolve, conscious that their bite, though cruel, might bring relief greater than any sovereign potion. Beneath the surface, however, doubt simmers, whispers swirl among the courtiers. Did you hear? The earl's physician bled his master to death last fortnight. I saw the queen's healer slip something into the wine after the bleeding. In a realm where poison could masquerade as cure, even the cleached slow feast became suspect. Each drop of blood offered by the king was both blessing and bargaining chip, a sign of trust placed in the healer's hands. Yet the physician, trained in the lore of Galen and Hippocrates, saw himself not as executioner but as humble servant to the body's mysteries. He watched the bloods who, rusty, deep red, or bright scarlet, as one might read a weathered map. Too dark, and it spoke of cold phlegm; too bright, and it signaled a fever unbroken. He noted the flow's steadiness, the gentle pulse beneath the skin, the way the king's breath shifted with each release. In his mind, the ritual was exacting art, a slow dance where each movement coaxed the body toward equilibrium. And still, the king's heart thundered with risk. Beneath the veneer of ceremony, He wondered, what if my trusted healer errs? What if envy or greed taints his skill? In an era when court intrigue wove through every corridor, the physician was as vulnerable as his patient. He carried the blame for failure and the suspicion of malice. One wrong move, one mismeasured drop, and his own head might end up on display beside a severed branch in the public square. As the bleeding neared its intended measure, the physician gently detached the leeches, crushing them between glass slides to prevent any chance of reuse. The king winced, more at the sight than the sensation. A gentle compress, cloth woven from linen and soaked in rose water and vinegar, was applied to staunch the flow. The physician then guided the monarch to a low bench by the brazier, where warmth could circulate through chilled limbs. Courtiers moved discreetly, replacing bowls and adjusting cloaks. "Take a breath here. Let the scene settle." The steady hiss of embers, the faint rustle of fabric, the soft murmur of consolation passing between healer and sovereign. Notice the profound intimacy of this moment. A man of immense power laid bare before another, trusting him with the essence of life. Finally, as the king's pulse steadied, the physician presented a small vial of honeyed wine infused with gentian and lavender, an elixir meant to fortify the blood and soothe the spirit. The monarch raised the goblet slowly, his hand steady now, and drank. A reluctant hope stirred in his chest, fragile as the smoke curling from the brazier. In the hush that follows, the chamber feels suspended in time. The crowd exhales, candles flicker less fiercely, the physician bows his head, a quiet nod of both triumph and humility. For while he has guided the ritual, he knows the body must still finish its journey toward health. As you step back, leaving the royal chamber behind, carry with you the echoes of that ritual, the sharp edge of the lancet, the slow feast of leeches, the chill of doubt, and the flicker of hope. Remember how, in that stone-walled room, the thin line between cure and curse was drawn in the king's own blood, and how trust, once broken, might never be fully restored. In the next chapter, we will trace how suspicion evolved into outright paranoia when medicine became murder, and the physician's white cloak darkened with the weight of mortal secrets. Step quietly now into the hidden corridors of power, where the clink of goblets can carry both relief and ruin. In the hush that follows a royal diagnosis, poison moved in shadows, so subtle that its taste was nearly indistinguishable from cure. You might imagine the physician as your ally, but in these courts, healers often lived under the same dread as their patients, the dread of betrayal wrapped in a silver chalice. Courtiers gathered in hushed clusters, trading rumors of strange fevers and mystery vials. A king might summon 3 doctors, not for skill, but to set them against one another, hoping one would betray the rest and reveal a plot. Some sovereigns required their physicians to taste wine before offering it to the monarch, a grim ritual in which trust was measured by how many could sip without twitching. Feel the tension coil as you imagine a grand banquet hall, torches guttering against cold stone. A goblet of pale wine sweeps past your lips, its sweetness tempered by a whisper of bitterness. You hesitate, recalling the story of King Louis of Navarre, who twice escaped assassination after refusing a physician's cup. The second time, he staggered back from the table, clutching his throat, only to collapse before the stunned court. In that gasp for air, the line between remedy and revenge was drawn in poison. Consider the physician's plight. Some were chosen not for knowledge, but for loyalty, spies in white coats, trained to deliver slow-cating toxins under the guise of healing. They could seed distrust among nobles by curing the king only when they gained favor, then secretly accelerate his decline when politics shifted. Every tincture, every pill, became a potential instrument of power, and every cure, no matter how genuine, bore the stain of suspicion. Now picture the queen's private herb room, walls lined with jars of mandrake and wolfsbanes. Behind its locked door, she sought genuine relief for her husband's ailments. Yet even here, paranoia lingered. Guards were posted, their tabards gleaming, to ensure no one slipped poison into the blend. Still, rumors whispered that some apothecaries spiked jugs with nightshade, selling their silence to the highest bidder. And in a court where reputation was everything, a single accusation could ruin a healer for life, or sentence him to the gallows. Let your mind drift to the shadowed alcove where a trembling physician prepares a salve of belladonna and opium. He measures carefully, mindful of both the dose and the eyes that watched him, some curious, some murderous. He bows his head as he opens a vial marked for his majesty only, reciting a muted prayer to ward off both sickness and suspicion. In that small act of devotion, you glimpse the razor's edge on which these healers lived. Yet not all physicians embraced poison. Many clung to their oaths, Determined to heal, they tended the king in secret, beneath flickering candles and behind locked doors. Where their true remedies, rosemary baths, warm compresses, gentle teas, offered solace without the specter of death. But even these men were tainted by association. When a ruler recovered, praise was scarce. When he died, blame was swift and unforgiving. Feel your pulse slow as you consider the ultimate irony that very hands meant to save could just as easily end a reign. And in that knowledge lurked the deepest fear of all, that trust, once broken, could never be mended. A poisoned king might forgive his assassin on the scaffold, but he never forgave his physician. When the banquet halls fell silent, and the court slipped into uneasy slumber, the specter of poison lingered in empty goblets and abandoned fuckles. It haunted every cup of tea, every draught of wine, every whispered promise of health. And in that lingering dread, you see why a monarch might tremble, not at the enemy beyond the walls, but at the one who knelt at his side, mixing hope and hate in the same panacea. As you step away from the palace's hidden plots, carry with you the taste of that bitterness. In the next chapter, we will unravel the secret language of physicians, words that could heal hearts or steer them toward despair. Step softly into the dimly lit scriptorium where physicians met in cloaks of muted wool and linen, their voices a low hum beneath vaulted ceilings. Here, in the hush between candle flickers, they spoke a tongue half Latin, half Caribbean, a lexicon drawn from Galen's humors, Arabic scholars, and whispered folk remedies. To a medieval court, this language was both shield and sword. It conveyed healing intent to the initiated, yet cloaked dangerous knowledge from prying ears. Imagine standing at the threshold, eavesdropping on words you cannot fully grasp, each syllable weighted with promise and peril. Consider the physician holding a sheaf of vellum parchment, inked with terms like sanguis, phlegma, and choler, a classification that mapped the body's hidden currents. He spoke of hot and dry temperaments or cold and moist extremes as though describing the personalities of rival lords. In his measured cadence, these unfamiliar phrases became poetry. The patient's sanguine fervor, he would murmur, besieges a cooling draught lest the humors rebel. To the untrained ear, these words sounded like prayer. To the learned, they shaped the very course of treatment. But within this poetic veneer lay danger. For certain phrases served as veiled warnings. To call a fever ardent might signify a simple infection, or hint at poisoning by arsenic, whose early symptoms mimicked common ills. When a physician recorded Letton's venom in private notes, he risked confession of knowledge tantamount to murder, or, if misinterpreted, became suspect of treason. Each phrase was etched in trembling ink, each marginal note a potential indictment. Now, imagine the court physician delivering his diagnosis before the king. He bowed deeply, voice calm and steady. Your Majesty, the corrupt humors seek dominion in your veins. I recommend a regimen of cooling poultices, tempered potions, and moderated bloodletting. To the assembly, it sounded like measured counsel, but to those who listened closely, nobles with ears trained by intrigue, corrupt humors could signify an assassination plot. They leaned forward, parsing each word for hidden meaning, ready to pounce on any sign of malice. Beyond official pronouncements, physicians relied on discreet coded communication. Sealed letters bore cryptic symbols. A circle besitted by a line might mark vials of belladonna. A small fleur-de-lis signified a genuine cure derived from monastery gardens. Apprentices learned to read these marks by lamplight, hands trembling as they measured each herb. In a world where betrayal lurked behind every door, these symbols allowed healers to practice their art in secret, sharing knowledge without drawing the watchful gaze of rival courts. Feel the tension in those hidden meetings, the scratch of quills, the soft rustle of scrolls, the collective sigh when a cure was found, or the quickened pulse when a new poison was discovered. Healers traded recipes by candle flame, passing vellum strips folded like accordions. They spoke of hydrogerum dulifians, mercurial compounds once hailed as panacea, but equally capable of destroying nerve and bone. A single mispronunciation of dulifians could mean the difference between relief and slow, agonizing death. Yet this secret tongue also fostered camaraderie. In a world riven by politics, physicians found unity in shared study. They formed clandestine earls, some meeting in abbey cloisters, others beneath city walls, where de humor, melancholia, and ad fibrem tertianum were discussed not as abstractions, but as invitations to collective discovery. They argued over texts, sometimes heatedly. Did theory trump simple garlic poultices? Was the alignment of Jupiter and Mars more potent than any herb? Their debates echoed across manuscripts, leaving footnotes that future healers would decipher. Close your eyes for a moment and breathe in the scent of tin, parchment, and drying ink. Hear the low murmur of Latin interspersed with vernacular curses, Old Breton or Provençal, when an apprentice spilled a vial of tincture. Sense the gravity of those moments, each word chosen with care, each sentence carrying the lives of monarchs and commoners alike. This was more than medical jargon. It was a covenant of trust among those who dared to balance on the knife edge of life and death. But for kings, this language often felt alien, a barrier between their vulnerability and the healer's promise. Some sovereigns attempted to learn the basics, memorizing key phrases in Latin so they could judge the truth of their prognosis. Others despised the complexity, preferring blunt commands: show me the wound, give me the cure. They saw no poetry in melancholia aquea, only a web of words spun to conceal mistakes. Their impatience bred deeper suspicion if the doctor spoke in riddles. Perhaps it was to hide intent. In some courts, mistrust reached its peak when physicians resorted to literal spells, incantations from herbal compendia bound with leather, promising to repel evil spirits or draw out poison. Shamans and sorcerers sometimes collaborated with surgeons, trading secrets in exchange for patronage. The lines between medicine, magic, and murder blurred beneath the same hooded cloak. Recite the Psalm of Augustine, one healer might whisper, then apply this ointment at midnight. The king dared to follow, not knowing whether a saint's blessing or a sorcerer's hex lay in wait. And yet, amid this labyrinth of language, there were moments of pure humanity. When a physician gently closed the king's eyes after a sleepless night, he murmured not Latin, but a prayer in the monarch's mother tongue, words of comfort that needed no translation. When an apprentice, overcome by exhaustion, wept in the hallway, senior healers would hush them with simple reassurances: tomorrow, the remedy will be gentler. In these fleeting acts, the secret language softened, revealing the healer's true lexicon: empathy, patience, care. Imagine now the weight of that empathy pressed into a single phrase. Fiducia sanat, trust heals. It was seldom written in any manuscript, but it echoed in the hearts of those who dared to speak truth. A king who trusted his daughter, who believed beyond the jargon, sometimes found relief greater than any tincture. And a doctor who earned that trust discovered a power beyond curing flesh: the power to calm fear, to soothe doubt, to mend the fragile bond between ruler and subject. As you drift back from the scriptorium's hush, carry with you the echo of those hidden words. Remember the soft scrape of quills, the flicker of candles, the hush that fell when sangus and venom hung in the air together. In that secret language, you glimpse the heart of medieval medicine, a delicate dance of knowledge and mystery, where life and death were traced in ink and uttered in whispers. In our next chapter, we will journey into the physical realm, into thistles, poultices, and bitter teas, where kings drank hope and fear alike in every cup. But for now, rest in the resonance of these words that could kill or cure. Slide into the quiet apothecary chamber, where shelves sag beneath the weight of earthenware jars and glass bottles, each labeled in fading script with names as strange as spells: Solteris, Calimtheria, Aquavita. The air is heavy with the scent of crushed petals, smoky resins, and something acrid you cannot name. Here, the court's most desperate gamble was brewed: bittersweet teas, blistering poultices, and boiled roots offered in hopes they might strengthen a king's waning blood. You stand before a long table scarred by years of mortar and pestle work, its surface stained crimson, amber, and green. In one corner, a small brazier glows beneath a copper cauldron, steam curling skyward like whispered prayers. In another, a wooden block holds bundles of dried herbs: sage for clarity, mint for fever, yarrow for bleeding. A servant moves with hushed steps, loading the brazier with fragrant coals. The physician slips forward, cloak brushing the flagstones, and begins the ritual that would demand the king's trust and his courage. First, there is the heat. The aldron's water roils, and the chamber fills with warm mist that clings to skin and gown. The physician lowers a handful of black horehound, its leaves crisp under his fingers, into the bubbling brew. You can almost taste the bitterness rising on your tongue. He murmurs a benediction over the steam, his voice soft as moss, then ladles the tea into a pewter cup engraved with the royal crest. A faint hiss escapes as the hot liquid meets cold metal, a breath of steam that lingers in the stillness. Now, imagine the king's hands reaching out, fingers brushing the cup's rim. He inhales slowly, drawing in the pungent aroma of horehound, thyme, and a single thread of rose. Each sip demands a measure of bravery, heat that scorches the throat, bitterness that clings to the palate like a stubborn memory. Yet with each swallow, a fragile hope blossoms that the tea's warmth will kindle his strength. coax the fever back into balance, remind his body of its own resilience. But hope in these halls was always laced with fear. For every genuine cure, there existed a mirror concoction thus brewed could be recorded to poison, mandrake replaced with hellebore, lavender swapped for hemlock. The same mortar and pestle that crushed rosemary for soothing poultices could pulverize white arsenic into invisible dust. Kings sometimes held a tasting spoon to the lips of their physician, demanding proof that no malice lay in the mixture. Other times, they tipped the cup back and prayed that trust, once given, would not betray them. Beyond teas, there were poultices, pastes of crushed herbs and animal fats, applied hot to swollen joints or festering wounds. The physician kneaded comfrey root with warm oil, his hands moving like a pianist's, until the mixture glowed amber beneath the lamp. With a broad knife, he spread the salve onto linen, soft as spider silk, and pressed it onto the king's skin. You might feel the king's brow crease as the poultice's warmth seeped through layers of costly fabric, drawing pain outward even as it soothed within. The scent of oil and herb filled the chamber, a heady reminder that healing often arrived wrapped in discomfort. Imagine, too, the iron-bound bathtub reserved for the monarch alone, filled with steaming water fortified by juniper berries and rosemary sprigs. Assistants helped the king disrobe, each movement weighed by the need to preserve dignity. He sank into the herbal bath, letting nausea and exhaustion drift away with the steam. The physician stood nearby, soaking linen compresses in the bathwater, then pressing them to the king's temples and wrists. Water lapped gently against the tub's rim, a lullaby drowned in the rustle of silk and the crackle of embers. Yet every remedy held its own peril. Hot baths could overheat the body, causing faintness or delirium. Blistering fomentations, mean to draw out toxins. Cold burned the skin, leaving scars that marked the body's betrayal. Even the purest herbal oils carried risk. A mismeasured drop of laudanum might lull the king into a stupor from which he never fully awoke. And so, the physician measured his ingredients as though weighing fate itself, adding pinches of bark or petals with trembling care. Feel the king's weariness as he emerges from the bath. His body relaxed but fragile. He wraps himself in linen scented with lavender and cloth of gold, his skin still tingling from the herbs. The physician offers a final draught of syrup thick with honey, infused with elderflowers and healing pin, promised to soothe cough and spirit alike. The king drinks, each drop a prayer, each swallow a fragile pact between hope and doubt. In the hush that follows, the chamber settles into a soft reverie. The brazier's glow dims as its coals burn low, the aldron's steam dissipates, and the jar stands silent. The king reclines on silken cushions, eyes half-closed, as the physician gathers the remnant herbs into pouches, sealing them for the next ritual. Courtiers drift away, their steps careful, leaving the chamber heavy with memory. Before you slip back through time's veil, take a breath and carry with you the residue of those scents, bitter, healing, perilous. Remember how in this world, kings drank both relief and fear in every cup, and how each remedy demanded a surrender of trust. For in the alchemy of herbs, heat and hope, medicine became as much a burden as a blessing. In our next chapter, we will reveal the king's fragility, how fevers and frailty shattered illusions of invincibility, and how the crown offered no shield against the body's betrayals. But for now, settle into this moment of warmth and uncertainty, and let the gentle echo of herb-laden steam lull you onward. In the hushed corridors of medieval courts, a monarch's very presence was a performance, a living emblem of strength, stability, and divine favor. Yet when fever took hold, even the most resplendent king was reduced to shivering frailty, his regal poise slipping away like mist before dawn. Tonight, we step into that vulnerable space, where crown and cloak offered no protection, and power itself seemed to amplify the terror of a trembling body. Imagine a grand audience chamber, its walls hung with tapestries depicting historic victories. Torches flicker along the stone, casting long shadows that dance as courtiers bow and scrape before their sovereign. The king sits upon a throne of carved oak and gilded steel, garments heavy with brocade and ermine, a crown of gold and jewels atop his head. Every eye in the hall is fixed upon him, every breath measured against the silence. This display of majesty, however, rests on a precarious thread: his health. Now envision the first sign of trouble, a faint flush across the king's cheek, unnoticed by all but his closest attendants, a cough soft at first, like a distant echo barely heard above the rustle of silk. He fights the urge to shiver, to draw a thick cloak tighter around his shoulders. Yet the favor's warmth blooms inside him, a fire kindled in his blood that no layered fabric can contain. Behind the scenes, a different ritual unfolds. The queen's handmaidens slip into secret chambers carrying warm flannels and spiced waters. They place them on the king's forehead and wrists, praying the herbs steeped in the water will coax the fever outward. A physician leans close, placing a fingertip on the king's neck to gauge his pulse. Rapid, thready, a heartbeat stumbling like a frightened horse. The physician's eyes flick toward the tapestries, as though seeking a talisman of past triumphs to bolster his master's will. Court protocol dictates that a king never show weakness, thus, servants clear the hall. Postponing public audiences, messengers are sent with coded dispatches to the realm. His Majesty rests briefly, but will resume his duties. Paintings of the king are commissioned under candlelight. Artists instructed to smooth his features, to deepen the color of his lips, to banish any sign of pallor. These portraits hang in town squares and distant castles, reassuring subjects that their ruler remains robust. Yet behind those reassuring images, the truth festers. A monarch's isolation deepens as his illness progresses. He is sequestered in a suite of hidden rooms, layered with guards to prevent gossip, and to hide his weakness. Courtiers stand at a respectful distance, offering only the briefest glimpses before retreating behind heavy drapes. The king's own family hesitates to enter, aware that mere proximity may betray the severity of his condition to spies and foreign envoys. This loneliness breeds fear. With every shiver, the king contemplates his mortality. Will this fever yield to poultices and prayers, or will it seize him like a phantom and carry him away? He recalls the deaths of his predecessors, uncles, cousins, rivals, who succumbed to similar fevers, their bodies laid in state beneath pallbearers' solemn cloaks. He wonders if history will remember him as triumph or tragedy. In dimly lit side chambers, the physician convenes with trusted advisors. They speak in hushed tones, part medical diagnosis, part political calculus. If he falters, they whisper, noble factions will emerge to claim the throne. Each cough echoes like a drumbeat of potential civil war. The king's illness thus becomes not only a personal crisis but a matter of statecraft, a ripple that threatens to shatter the realm's fragile unity. Meanwhile, the court physician administers treatments drawn from generations of lore, bitter tonics to cool the blood, aromatic compresses to clear the head, modest bloodletting to restore balance. Yet each remedy bears risk. A mismeasured dose of opiate could lull the king into stupor, reducing his will to a pliant shadow. An aggressive bleeding might weaken him further, exposing him to delirium and delirious hallucinations of betrayal. The physician works by candlelight, hands steady but mind anxious, as if performing a dangerous ceremony on sacred ground. As days pass, the king's public appearances grow more infrequent. He issues decrees in writing, his seal stamped upon documents drafted by ministers, but the vibrancy of his voice is missed. Court entertainments, jousts, feasts, tournaments, care postponed or cancelled, the empty stands and silent trumpets a stark reminder of his absence. Peasants in distant provinces hear rumors of his ailment and whisper among themselves, is the realm cursed? Has God withdrawn his favor? Without the king's living presence, superstition flares. In a rare moment of private reflection, the ailing king gazes into a polished basin of silver. He studies his own image, sunken cheeks, glazed eyes, hair damp with sweat. The throne feels farther away than ever, its promises of power and prestige empty against the raw truth of his flesh. He recalls the oath he once took, to protect, to defend, to embody strength, and wonders how to fulfill that vow when his own bones betray him. The queen, ever steadfast, remains at his side. She presses cool linen to his brow, wipes dark circles beneath his eyes, and whispers stories of their children's laughter to coax him from despair. Her touch, soft and warm, offers the only genuine balm against his fear. In her presence, he is not king, but husband, yet even this solace bears the weight of expectation. If he dies, what becomes of her and their heirs? Their shared anxiety folds them together in a fragile sanctuary, two souls clinging to hope in a storm of fever. Outside, courtiers draw lots to determine regency should the king fail. Ambition stirs beneath polite smiles. A duke speaks of stewardship, a bishop hints at spiritual guardianship. Each maneuver is cloaked in deference, yet every gesture conceals the steel of political calculation. The king, weakened though he may be, senses the currents of power shifting around his deathbed. This realization deepens his vulnerability. Not only must he defeat his fever, but he must preserve the realm itself from the grasping hands of opportunists. At night, the king's dreams are troubled. Feverish visions blur past fields of red poppies bleeding into the sky. Courtier's face is dissolving into masks of flame, crown and sword drifting away on a river of tears. He wakes with a start, heart pounding, and finds himself in a quiet chamber where only the physician stands vigil. The doctor offers water and a reassuring murmur, but fear still coils in the king's chest like a venomous serpent. In the 5th dawn since his illness began, a turning point arrives. The physician, after careful observation, announces a new course of treatment, a gentle purgative drawn from Senta and Fental. To cleanse the body of the favor's poison, the remedy is risky. Some kingly patients recoiled at its bitter taste, but the monarch, desperate for relief, consents. He drinks the concoction, each swallow a testament to his hope and fear intertwined. The chamber's hush is broken only by the echo of his breath and the soft drip of a leaking torch. Hours pass. The king's face grows pale, his body racked with cramps. Courtiers press against the chamber door, anxious for news. Finally, a faint flush returns to his cheeks. His pulse steadies. His breathing, once ragged, becomes measured. A cautious cheer rises. Muted by humility, the favor, at least for now, relents its hold. But victory is tentative. For in the wake of such suffering, the monarch emerges altered. He stares at the parchment on his desk, its inked words once full of promise, now questioning their own worth. He hears the soft footsteps of courtiers approaching, some with relief, others with hidden agendas, and feels anew the fragility of his station. The crown upon his head weighs heavier than before, its gold a reminder that, however strong the ruler, flesh beneath cannot be gilded into invincible armor. In the days that follow, the king resumes his duties slowly, like a ship righting itself after a storm. He holds private audiences in smaller chambers. His voice clear but measured. He lapses into coughing fits if he overexerts. And courtiers hasten to offer waters and cushions, portraits or commissioned anew, this time meant to celebrate his return. But still bearing the pale memory of his trial, the public, eager for reassurance, greets his visits with joy, but the king knows that behind each cheer lies the lingering question: will he endure? Or will the fever return? As you step away from this scene of regal fragility, carry with you the lesson of the king's ordeal, that no matter how lofty one's station, human vulnerability is universal. A crown may command armies and subjects, but it cannot command the humors of blood, the tremors of fever, or the silence of an aching body at night. In this knowledge lies both humility and comfort that beneath silks and furs, beneath gold and gemstones, we are bound by the same frail vessel of flesh. And now, let this awareness settle within you as you prepare for the next chapter, where we will explore the perilous position of the physician himself, haunted by the shadow of failure and the threat of reprisal in equal measure. For in the dance between healer and sovereign, fear binds them both in a fragile, unbreakable embrace. In the pale glow of torchlight, the physician paused at the edge of the royal chamber, his breath caught not by the scent of balm or the whisper of healing, but by the weight of suspicion that hung thicker than any incense. Each step he took echoed on the cold flagstones, a muffled drumbeat of dread. Outside this room, courtiers leaned close to one another, their eyes flicking to his dark cloak as though expecting it to conceal a dagger as readily as it did potions. For a healer in medieval courts, the greatest threat lay not in pestilence or plague, but in the frail thread of trust that bound him, thread so fragile it could snap at the faintest tremor of his hand. He entered and bowed deeply, revealing only the back of his head to the court's gaze before the king. His hands, pale in the torchlight, bore hidden signs, a slight tremor in the fingers, a tension in the knuckles that spoke of countless sleepless nights. In his satchel lay the tools of his craft, needles, poultices, herbs crushed into powders, but also scraps of parchment detailing forbidden recipes, secret formulas tucked away in case he needed to prove his innocence. One wrong diagnosis, one misread pulse, and those parchments would become evidence against him, a roadmap to accusation. As he knelt at the monarch's side, he listened to the king's labored breath, measured the pulse that fluttered beneath linen like a wounded bird, and prepared to administer what relief he could. Yet even this act of care was fraught with peril. The king's courtiers crowded the chamber's fringes, each face carved of concern and veiled calculation. They watched not only the monarch's reaction, but the physician's every gesture, how he poured the tea, how he spoke the words of reassurance, how he touched the king's wrist. Their unspoken question hovered: was this healer truly an agent of Mary, or a criminal in waiting? Once, in another court far south, a physician had misdiagnosed a duke's fever as simple heat. The duke had died, and the healer's hands had been judged guilty of negligence. He was dragged through the streets, chained at the ankles, forced to scrub away the very blood he could not save. That story lingered in the physician's mind like a warning bell, tolling with every hurried step he took in service of the crown. He carried it as stealthily as he carried his planets, an ever-present memory of how quickly gratitude can sour into retribution. After tending to the king, he withdrew with practiced calm, sealing his sapphire and brushing the velvet of his robe to remove any trace of blood. The courtiers exhaled, some in relief, others in silent appraisal. He made his way to the small chamber reserved for royal howlers, a room with walls hung in deep violet and floors draped in thick tapestries to muffle both sound and suspicion. Here, he allowed himself a moment's reprieve, the quiet click of the door locking behind him, the soft sigh of solitude. In that brief solitude, he dared to let his shoulders drop. His heart's low, but even that sanctuary was a cage. Shelves in the howler's private chamber were crowded with volumes of medical lore, Gallen's treatises, Avienna's compendium, and countless scrolls filled with marginal notes, corrections, and secret addenda. These texts were his lifeblood, but they were also his chains. Should they fall into the wrong hands, each annotation could be twisted into proof of malpractice or malice. He kept the rarest recipes sewn into the lining of his cloak, their ink nearly invisible to any who might seize his manuscripts. Each secret he guarded was a breath held, a prayer whispered in darkness. At dawn, the king's hunting party stirred beyond the palace gates. The monarch, resting under layers of copper and velvet, planned to ride despite lingering weakness. The physician found himself summoned before the council of noble stern-faced men who demanded assurances. They questioned him on the king's recovery, the nature of his fever, the potency of his cures. Each query was a trap. A misstep, one faltered phrase or misplaced statisty might brand him incompetent. And yet, he answered with measured precision, drawing upon charts and pulse readings, invoking the authority of learned scholars. When he spoke, his voice was calm. Inside, his blood ran cold. Later that afternoon, he retreated once more to the apothecary's dim back room. Candle wax dripped onto stone countertops strewn with mortar and pestle, cracked vials, and half-mixed sobs. Here, in the hush broken only by the distant clatter of goblets and the tinkle of lute strings from a nearby hall, the physician prepared for tomorrow's audience. Each herb was weighed with careful patience. A pinch too much could kill, a grain too few could fail. His apprentice watched, wide-eyed, learning not merely the art of healing, but the skill of concealment. Some powders were merely falsified, benign herbs ground fine to mimic more dangerous substances in case of inspection, while the true cure was hidden in a separate vial, labeled with a cipher known only to them. By nightfall, rumors began to swirl anew. A foreign envoy alleged that the physician's cure was borrowed from alchemical texts, whose practices were condemned as heresy. A jealous noble claimed to have seen the healer slip a pale powder into the duke's wine at the last feast. The physician caught wind of the gossip from the kitchen maids, their voices low at the stew cauldron. He swallowed a bitter draught to calm his quivering throat, reminding himself that truth is fragile, especially when spoken by those who fear being swallowed by their own ambitions. In his quarters, he poured himself a small glass of wine infused with cardamom and star anise, an old remedy for frayed nerves, and let the warmth rise through his chest. He sat by a shuttered window, where moonlight traced silver lines across the dark courtyard. He thought of the oath he once took to do no harm, to ease suffering, to heal. That oath, at once his shield and his burden, felt heavier now than any iron chain. He scribbled a note to his apprentice, instructing him to burn the offered recipes at first light should anything befall them both. As dawn approached, the physician slept fitfully, dreams haunted by the clang of dungeon gates and the echo of beheading blades. In those nightmares, he saw himself kneeling before a tribunal, head bowed as executioners read his crimes aloud. He felt the rough rope at his neck, tasted the cold kiss of steel, heard the hush of the crowd before the final breath. He woke with a start, heart pounding, and realized that fear had become his constant companion, even more so than hope. And yet, despite the peril, the physician continued. At first light, he donned his cloak, hidden recipes sewn close to his heart, and made his way through corridors lined with portraits of kings long dead. Each likeness gazed down as a silent witness, reminding him that death and power have long been intertwined. He entered the chamber once more, greeted by the sight of the king's steady breathing. In that moment, he felt a flicker of purpose that his service, though fraught with danger, was the only defense the sovereign had against mortal frailty. For in the dance between healer and sovereign, neither held all the power. The king depended on the physician's skill, the physician depended on the king's favor. Both lived with the understanding that trust could be stolen as easily as a knife in the dark. And in that trembling balance, in the narrow corridor between cure and condemnation, the medieval doctor found his true prison, not a cell of stone, but a life lived in perpetual fear, bound by oath and suspicion, where every heartbeat counted as both gift and gamble. As you leave this hidden chamber of dread and dedication, carry with you the echo of the physician's footsteps, the weight of his watchfulness, and the unspoken question that lingered in every measured pulse: what is the cost of healing when the healer himself is hunted by fear? In the hush before dawn, long after torches guttered and parchment scrolls were rolled away, another kind of healer made his way through castle corridors, the faith healer, bearer of relics and miracles, whose medicine was prayer rather than potion. Tonight, we step into the vaulted chapels and hidden shrines where kings, desperate for relief beyond the reach of leeches and poultices, sought solace in sacred rites. Here, hope did not flow from mortar and pestle but from touch, confession, and the promise of divine intervention. You stand in a narrow aisle of flickering candles, their wicks dripping tears of wax onto ancient flagstones carved with crosses. The air is thick with incense, myrrh, frankincense, and a sharper tone you cannot name, winding around you like a benediction. Kneeling at the far end, you see the monarch cloaked in velvet, head bowed over a reliquary, a small casket said to hold a fragment of a saint's bone. His shoulders shake with silent sobs, and each breath is a petition for mercy, for strength, for the faith to outlast fever. In this realm, medicine and religion intertwined, forming a tapestry of ritual that kings found impossible to resist. The court physician, learned in texts but humbled by his own failures, often stood at the back, watching as priests chanted litanies in Latin and the king pressed his lips to the reliquary's cool metal. If a poultice failed, perhaps a miracle might prevail. If bloodletting weakened him further, perhaps the intercession of a holy man would restore balance. Here, science surrendered to sanctity, and the body yielded to the spirit's promise. Imagine the procession that led to these chambers, a cohort of monks bearing thuribles of burning incense, acolytes carrying candles whose flames danced in time with prayers. The king, cloaked in scarlet and ermine, walked barefoot along a carpet of rose petals laid out for sacred purpose. Each step was an act of humility, each petal a plea for healing. Behind him, courtiers followed, their embroidered doublets whispering across the stone floor, faces solemn as though attending a funeral rather than a supplication for life. At the head of the chapel, a bishop stood holding aloft a chalice filled with chrism oil, consecrated in midnight vigils beneath a silver moon. He dipped his thumb, then traced a cross on the king's forehead and wrists, signs meant to ward off both illness and malice. The oil glimmered like a promise in torchlight, and as it touched flesh, a hush fell. In that silence, you felt the palpable shift here. In this moment, lay a faith potent enough to silence the doubts sown by bloodletting and cleaching. Yet, faith healers were not universally trusted by all. Some physicians watched from the gallery, lips pressed tight, recalling the learned texts that denounced superstition. They whispered to one another, "This is theater, not therapy." Others, torn between loyalty to science and compassion for the suffering, bent their heads in reverence, accepting that in absence of certainty, hope was itself a form of remedy. And so, between mortar and prayer, a fragile alliance formed, one born of desperation and bound by the human craving for comfort. Now picture the king kneeling at a stone font, water lapping at his knees. A hermit from a distant monastery approached, bearing a simple bowl of spring water infused with rose petals and chalk. The hermit's reputation was legend. He had claimed visions of angels guiding his hands. He ladled water onto the king's brow, each drop a benediction. In Nomen Patrix, at Felsi, at Spiritus Sancti, he intoned, his voice echoing off vaulted arches. The king closed his eyes, letting the cool water wash away the fever's fire. In that moment, science paled before faith's embrace, but faith healers carried their own weight of fear and doubt. Some, accused of harlotanry, faced flogging or exile if their miracles failed to manifest. Others navigated treacherous politics. A miracle for one monarch might prove blasphemy in another court. They learned to cloak their work in secrecy, arriving under moonlight, slipping into hidden cellars to perform rites away from prying eyes. They kept fragments of relics sealed in pouches sewn into their robes, some genuine, others fabricated, knowing that a saint's bone could restore a king's health or, if discovered counterfeit, spell ruin for them both. Feel the tension as you imagine a clandestine midnight healing torches placed in iron sconces. Chanting in low, measured tones, the sick king carried on a litter to a hidden chapel beneath the castle. Cloaked figures stood guard at stone doorways, their halberds alert for intruders. Inside, the healer anointed the king's temples with oils, traced sigils on parchment, and read from a faded psalter. He prayed in tongues half forgotten, invoking saints whose names had become blurred with time. Each syllable fell like petals on stone, fragile, fleeting, yet charged with desperate hope. On one such night, a hermit healer known as Brother Alaric claimed to cure a king's tremors with naught but a single prayer. Word spread like wildfire. Foreign envoys arrived bearing gold and silk to commission the hermit's services. But in another court, Alari's miracles were derided, his reliquaries smashed, and his name branded heretic. His realist, one revered, beam evidence at an inquisition, and Alaric himself was burned at the stake. This stark reversal reminded all who dared blend faith and medicine that miracles could become accusations, and that hope, once granted, could vanish in an instant. Yet for every brother Alaric condemned, countless humble clergy moved quietly through castle wards, offering comfort where physicians could not. They heard confessions, administered sacraments, and stayed at the king's side through delirium and fevered nightmares. Their presence offered more than spiritual relief, it restored a measure of dignity to a monarch stripped bare by illness. In the bishop's gentle touch, the monk's whispered prayer, the lay brother's steadfast vigil, the king found an intimacy medicine could not provide, a reminder of shared humanity in the face of mortality. Take a gentle breath now and let the candlelight flicker in your mind's eye. Recall the hush of the chapel, the scent of myrrh, the soft murmur of Latin prayers, and the tremor in the king's voice as he implored the saints for mercy. In that convergence of faith and frailty, you witnessed the medieval heart laid bare, power laid aside, vulnerability embraced, and the hope that sometimes, in absence of cure, belief becomes its own balm. As the first rays of morning filtered through stained glass windows, painting the chapel floor in hues of ruby and sapphire, the king rose, his body still weak, but his spirit buoyed by the night's ritual. He spoke few words, a terse thanks to the bishop, a nod to the monks, a silent glance to the hidden physician at the back. In that moment, all three shared a bond: healer by prayer, healer by potion, and sovereign by need. And so, the king returned to his chamber, the weight of his crown and scepter once again upon his shoulders. His fever had cooled, not solely by leech or poultice, but by the unity of hope, soon together in prayer, relic, and ritual. In corridors thereafter, courtiers spoke in reverent tones: he is returned to us, by the grace of God and by hands both earthly and divine. Yet beneath that praise lay a deeper truth. When science faltered, faith prevailed. When faith faltered, the soul needed science. In the medieval mind, healing was never simply a matter of one or the other. It was the harmony of both, blood and blessing, tincture and prayer, leech and relic. And in that delicate balance, kings learned that true power lay not in resisting vulnerability, but in embracing every avenue of hope, however humble or miraculous. Before we step away from these candlelit sanctuaries, carry with you the resonance of prayer as medicine, and the understanding that in those dark hours, belief itself became the most potent cure of all. The hush is absolute, torch flames flicker low, and the royal chamber feels suspended between life and what lies beyond. A single shaft of moonlight breaks through narrow windows, illuminating tapestries that once celebrated triumphs but now bear silent witness to an ending. Here, the king lies upon silken cushions, his breath shallow, each pause an echo of decades spent in power. Tonight, the physician's final task is not to cure, but to accompany, a solemn witness to the monarch's last appointment with mortality. You enter softly, mindful that even the slightest footfall might shatter the fragile stillness. The chamber door, heavy and carved with the family crest, seals behind you with a muted thunk. The air is cool, scented faintly of lavender and astringent linen, remnants of poultices applied earlier to staunch shaking limbs and ease aching joints. A low stool is set beside the bed, where the physician sits, cloak drawn close, eyes shadowed with grief and duty entwined. At the bedside, the king's hand lies open, veins fading into translucent skin. His crown rests on a velvet cushion nearby, its jewels dull in dim light. This regal artifact, once the centerpiece of every ceremony, now seems an impersonal relic, heavy with expectation, heavy with finality. The monarch's eyes, once steeled by councils of war and proclamations of law, are now clouded with fatigue and reflection. He seems smaller, more human, vulnerable to a brief swim rather than a battle's roar. The physician leans forward, placing a gentle palm atop the king's heart. Feeling each tremor of life, he murmurs words soft as a benediction, Your Majesty. The stars guide you now, as they did in youth. Speak freely. The king's voice emerges, a hoarse whisper, I have lived by the sword, and by this hand. He lifts the physician's palm, pressing it against his eyelids. I fear not death, only the stories left untold. And here begins the confession, an intimate rite where sovereign sheds silhouette of power and becomes merely a soul in need of absolution. The physician, once master of humors and humankind, now serves as scribe of the soul. He retrieves a quill and parchment unearthed during the fevered days of treatment, and holds it ready. The king's fading gaze meets his doctor's, an unspoken pact that truth, long concealed by protocol and pride, will now find release. First, the king recalls the early days, his father's crown pressing heavy on his brow, the battlefield's dust clinging to his armor, the oath sworn beneath chapel arches. Tears, long withheld, gather in the corner of his eyes. He speaks of decisions made with steel and fire, of alliances forged and broken. Each memory is a confession. I ordered villages scorched, believing order demanded sacrifice. Forgive me for believing my cause just, the physician writes, ink flowing like a slow river, transcribing sins and regrets with solemn care. Outside, the court conceals its breath. Guards stand like sentinels of grief, their tabards lowered, faces etched in regret for battles unhosen and lives undone. A chamberlain hovers beyond curtain's edge, knowing too well that once these words spill forth, the king's legacy will shift. Portraits in the hall, once proud and triumphant, may now capture a man haunted by his own laurels. History, after all, is a narrative shaped by confession as much as conquest. As the ink darkens the parchment, the king's voice steadies. He recalls compassion withheld, a widow's plea unanswered, a conspirator's mercy denied. He whispers of the mercy he never granted, and of the kindness he might have shown. They called me ruthless, he says, yet I feared mercy as weakness. Tell them, I sought strength where only grace endured. The physician pauses, offering a draught of lavender wine, less to sustain life, more to soothe the soul. The king drinks, savoring warmth that spreads through his chest like distant sunlight. Time blurs, minutes become memories, and memories bleed into confession. The king speaks of love, of the queen's laughter echoing through dawn's corridors, of children's laughter filling banquet halls. He weeps for joys neglected in pursuit of power. I drowned their smiles in ambition's tide. Forgive me, for I loved them in moments stolen by duty. The physician lays down quill and takes the king's hand, offering presence beyond prescription. A hush falls as the wind sighs through narrow windows, stirring curtains like ghosts passing through. The king's breath falters. He gasps, each inhale shallow, each exhale a surrender. The physician presses a cloth scented with rosewater to the monarch's lips, an offering of comfort at journey's threshold. He whispers a prayer, may peace find you beyond this veil, and may your heart's burdens rest at last. In these final moments, the king's eyes find the physician's, and a fragile gratitude flickers between them. No titles, no rounds, just two souls bound by the shared witness of life's fragility. The doctor brushes a stray lock of hair from the king's brow, feeling the pulse weaken beneath his fingertips. The quill remains poised on parchment. The confession incomplete, but words now no longer needed. The ceremony of truth is its own absolution. Outside the chamber, a distant bell tolls the horror, a funeral knell for a reign drawing to close. Footsteps hush, and the courtyard beyond clamps itself in muted anticipation. Within, the king's chest rises once more, gentle, fleeting, and then stills. The physician closes the monarch's eyes with trembling reverence. Smoothing the linen across his brow, he lays the quill upon the parchment. Ink still wet, as if marking the end of both confession and crown. Silence settles, profound and unbroken. The chamber's torchlight flickers, casting long shadows that dance across tapestries now heavier with sorrow. The physician rises, crestfallen yet serene, knowing his last treatment was not of body but of spirit. The parchment, rattled in his gloved hand, bears the weight of a king's final trust, an account of mercy sought too late, of power wielded without heart. As dawn's first light seeps through stained glass, the coffin awaits, polished oak bound in silver, lined in velvet and lace. The physician stands at its head, placing the confession parchment atop the monarch's chest, a testament that the greatest medicine may be the chance to speak truth before the end. Courtiers file past, offering silent bows to both crown and confession, hearts tempered by the humility of death. And so, the last appointment concludes. No more poultices, no more elixirs, come lay the quiet dignity of a life laid down in full disclosure. In that final chamber, healing was not measured in poultices or potions, but in the release of truth and the embrace of grace. The door groans on ancient hinges as the physician is ushered into the grim tower chamber, its walls slick with damp and lit only by a single, sputtering torch. He pauses beneath the arch, swallowing hard against the cold that isn't entirely from the stone. In the courtyard below, the king's court continues its daily rituals, banquets, audiences, pageantry. Yet here, removed and forgotten, the healer stands condemned by the very people he once served. The satchel that held his remedies has been seized, his robes, once fine wool, replaced by raw-spun garments that scratch his skin, and at his feet lies the silent testimony of his fall wooden stool. A small table bearing ink-stained confession sheets, and a vial of unguent untouched, its healing promise now meaningless. He recalls the moment accusation first fell upon him, a sudden relapse of the queen's fever, a noble's whispered rumor that he had overruled the duke to please rival factions, a dossier of charges delivered with pomp to the king's council. At first, he believed it a misunderstanding, until the guards came, faces impassive, and bound his hands with iron manacles that bit into his flesh. The shame of being led through gilded halls, once echoing with praise, into corridors where every echo whispered traitor, is a memory he cannot shake. In this cell, the damp air carries the faintest echo of footsteps far above, where lords and ladies dine and gossip on his fate. Each footfall is a hammer blow to his spirit, reminding him that in the delicate balance of power, a healer's success can be celebrated one day and deemed witchcraft the next. He sits on the stool, the cold wood pressing into his back, and studies the narrow slit of sky visible through the barred window. It is a sliver of freedom, a reminder that even the smallest opening can sustain hope. Word spreads quickly in court: physician X conspired to murder the sovereign by slow poison. A foreign envoy reported overhearing his plot. His scholarly texts contain hidden arsenic formulas. These half-truths and outright lies swirl like noxious smoke, fueled by political ambition and fear. Each noble with a grudge, Callians turn to enmity, favor swung to contempt, finds in him the perfect scapegoat. Better to punish the healer than admit weakness in the throne's infirmary. Yet inside his cell, the physician learns that punishment need not be solely pain. The true torture lies in erasure of reputation, of purpose, of identity. The tools of his life's work vanish. No more leeches, no more lancets, no more pill jars line the shelves. Instead, he is left only with rumors and memories. He stares at the wall, tracing with his eyes the damp patterns where moss grows in the shape of crosses. In that pattern he sees both judgment and mercy entwined. Late one night, a whisper threads through the tower, a gaoler, moved by an old debt of kinness, one healed of a grievous wound by this very man, slips through the bars a scrap of parchment and a shard of bone. The parchment bears a Zifford remedy, and the bone, promised to be part of a saint's relic, glimmers with potential sanctity. For your sister's child, the guard murmurs, before disappearing into the gloom. In that moment, the physician rekindles a spark of purpose even in chains. He can heal. Word of the clandestine cure spreads among the prisoners, knights unjustly condemned, conspirators awaiting trial, fellow physicians exiled for speaking truth. They seek him out in whispers, slipping scraps of wool to block prying ears as they reveal ailments: a rotting wound, a fever unbroken by prison fare, a daughter's failing sight. And though his supplies are meager, a pinch of crushed berries here, a drop of stolen oil there, he administers relief, stitching wounds with makeshift bandages, distilling teas from scrounged herbs, scribbling short prayers in place of medical prose. These acts of secret mercy mark him in the eyes of his fellow inmates. They come to see him not as traitor, but as a savior whose reputation was poisoned by court intrigue. In the dark corridors, he becomes the tower's angel, a healer who mends more than bodies. He mends fractured trust. Yet even this small redemption carries danger if discovered. He knows torture awaits, perhaps even the rack, to force him to confess to the very crimes he refutes. Above, in the golden halls, the king's court continues its charade. A new physician, one without rivals, takes his place, performing ministrations that bring comfort but lack the subtle skill of the tower-bound healer. Courtiers praise the newcomer, their voices lilting with relief that the traitor is gone. But rumors persist. Palace leaks say the new cures cost more coin and bear fewer results. Murmurs drift back to the tower like an ironic benediction when you return. We shall need you again. Months pass. The tower's dampness seeps into bone and mind. Yet the healer endures, bolstered by his clandestine service to the imprisoned. One dawn, as pale light seeps through the bars, he hears the clang of fetters unlocking. The guard who once smuggled the remedy now stands before him. Key in hand, pardon granted, the man says, voice low. The queen recovered fully. The king regrets the counsel of his advisors. You are free for now. But take care, praise can poison you as deadlier than any arsenic. He steps from the cell into a courtyard of frost and amber light. The tower stones glow in morning's hush, as if absolving themselves of the wrongs they bore witness to. He gathers his cloak, worn and frayed, and fastens it around his shoulders. In that moment, he carries both the scars of his imprisonment and the quiet strength that comes from serving in obscurity. As he walks away, the castle gates creak open, and he glimpses the courtiers emerging for their morning audience. Their eyes flick to him, some with awe, others with lingering distrust. He raises neither hand in triumph nor head in shame. Instead, he bows to the world he once knew and the world from which he was exiled. He carries no satchel of medicines, but inside him lies a deeper remedy, the knowledge that true healing requires resilience beyond skill, compassion beyond acclaim, and the courage to serve even when praise turns to poison. We step now away from chambers of stone and torches flicker, beyond the hush of hushed confession and the hush of midnight rituals, into a broader landscape of fear, faith, and fragile power. Beneath the weight of velvet cloaks and crowns of gold, there lay a body, vulnerable, aging, human, and it was this body, more than any neighbor's blade or enemy's siege, that haunted monarchs most deeply. Imagine the throne room in the quiet hours before dawn. Tapestries hang motionless on cold walls. The scent of spent candles lingers in the air. A single figure sits upon a dais, the king's silhouette framed by dawn's pale light. His gaze drifts downward to the jeweled pommel of his sword, then to the heavy hem of his robe, and finally to the veins at his wrist, blue rivers pulsing with the uncertain flow of mortality. In that silent pause, he confronts a truth no court ceremony can disguise. A crown may grant authority over others, but it grants no dominion over the body's betrayals. Power, in its splendor, crafts an illusion of invincibility. It whispers that might can bend rivers, that armies can shatter empires, that law can tame chaos, yet no edict can staunch a favor's rise. No army can reclaim strength once lost to frailty. No charter can reinstate life when the humors falter. The monarch learned this with each aching joint, each trembling hand, each fevered night, and with that knowledge came a profound terror that beneath all pomp and ceremony, he remained as powerless as any commoner before the slow commerce of disease. Consider how carefully the court concealed these moments of vulnerability. Chambers were arranged so that public audiences showcased only robust health, smiles practiced in the morning mirror, greetings delivered with measured vigor, robes draped to obscure pale limbs. Portraits commissioned in haste captured a visage of vitality that reality no longer supported. Diplomats and envoys, invited to magnificent feasts and tournaments, saw only the facade, a ruler untouched by the decay of flesh. Yet behind closed doors, secret passages lead to infirmaries and hidden alcoves, where physicians tended delicate flesh far from prying eyes. This dance of concealment speaks to a deeper longing, not just of medieval kings, but of every one of us. We too weave stories of strength when weakness aches within. We schedule doctor appointments for late afternoon to mask absence from work. We smile through pain so that friends need not worry. We post only the brightest moments of our lives, leaving the struggles unseen. We build our own courts of image and expectation, seeking refuge in the belief that control is possible. Cover bodies over destinies, over perceptions, yet true control remains an illusion. From the hum of modern hospitals to the hush of surgical wards, the same fear echoes that we are, at our core, subject to forces beyond our mastery. A surgeon's hand may guide a scalpel with precision, but the body's response is never guaranteed. A life saved may wobble on the brink of complications. A promise of recovery still trembles on the edge of relapse. In our hearts, we understand that healing, like history, is both art and ident, a delicate balance between skill and surrender. Medieval kings learned this lesson perhaps more acutely because their medicine was more ritual, more alchemy, more faith. A leech bite or a palsy's warmth offered solace, but also reminded the sovereign of dependency. Faith healers' prayers bestowed hope, but also underscored the mystery of body and spirit. Deathbed confessions laid bare the human under the royal, and physicians imprisoned revealed the peril of practice. Through each chapter, The king confronted the same revelation that no throne could fully shelter him from the silent tribunal of flesh. In reflecting on this, we find echoes in our own age. We trust technology to monitor our hearts, medications to steady our minds, specialists to decode our DNA. We book screenings, take prophylactics, swallow supplements. Yet each screening can reveal ominous news. Each prophylactic carries side effects. Each supplement offers promise fleetingly tested. We place faith in systems, insurance plans, research grants, regulatory approvals that resemble medieval guilds and royal charters. But when those systems fail or falter, the same terror arises that the body, our most intimate kingdom, remains beyond complete conquest. And so we learn that seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but an affirmation of our shared vulnerability. When the king summoned his physician, he yielded a measure of control, handing over the reins of his health to another's care. In doing so, he risked betrayal, misdiagnosis, paralysis, yet he also embraced the possibility of grace, of relief, of restored balance. We, too, in doctors' offices and counseling rooms, exchange autonomy for expertise, trusting that another's skill can guide us through suffering. That transaction, at once hopeful and hazardous, reflects an ancient bond between healer and healed. The illusion of control shimmers most brightly when we forget our limitations. A king might believe that building towering walls or forging alliances could repel all threats. Yet no rampart shields against the slow creep of age or the sudden strike of illness. Embassies and treaties cannot negotiate with cancer cells or genetic mutations. In those intersections of power and powerlessness, humility emerges as the truest strength, recognizing that life's fragility binds us together, not apart. Imagine the monarch, standing on a balcony at dawn, gaze cast toward distant hills. The wind carries the promise of spring, of new life. He inhales deeply, air scented with blossom and dew, and feels a kinship with every living being striving against entropy. The crown heavy upon his head feels lighter in that moment, less a tether to authority and more a symbol of stewardship, a call to guide. Yes, but also to serve. He considers that true leadership may mean acknowledging limits, embracing counsel, and sharing vulnerability to forge deeper bonds with those he rules. This is the lesson of Section 12, that fear, when met with understanding, can transform into empathy. The king's dread of doctors spelled out his deepest insecurity, the terror of knowing that flesh is fallible. But that terror also opened doors to compassion for his subjects, who likewise confronted illness without regard to rank, for his physicians, who practiced skill under threat, for his family, who bore witness to both triumphs and frailty. The shared experience of vulnerability became a bridge across the chasm of power. And so we, in our own lives, might pause and reflect on how we approach our bodies and each other. Do we hide pains, fearing judgment? Do we present only polished exteriors, convinced that showing cracks invites collapse? Or do we, like the transformed monarch, dare to reveal our humanness, seeking help early, speaking truths gently, nurturing connections rooted in authenticity? In vulnerability lies not defeat, but the power to unite, to heal, and to grow. As our journey through medieval fear draws to a close, we carry forward a final, gentle truth that whether we wear a crown of gold or the simple crown of daily life, our bodies remain beautiful enigmas, alive with possibility, susceptible to harm, craving compassion. The illusion of control may comfort us, but it is in embracing uncertainty that we discover our shared strength. Let this reflection rest in your mind like a soft benediction. Breathe deeply, feel the rise and fall of your own pulse, and recognize the ancient link between healer and healed, sovereign and subject, self and other. And as you drift toward sleep or onward into your day, remember this: that fear, acknowledged, can become a teacher, that trust, extended, can become a bond, and that in the quiet acceptance of our frailty, we find the deepest expression of our humanity. And now, perhaps that is enough for tonight. Let the story settle like mist around the quiet hills of your mind, and find rest in knowing that power and vulnerability walk hand in hand, always intertwined, always reminding us that to be human is to be beautifully fragile. Let us pause now, not in sorrow, but in gentle stillness, where understanding softens judgment and curiosity blooms into compassion. Across all we have witnessed, one figure stands quietly central: the physician. More than a healer of bodies, he served as a mirror, reflecting each monarch's deepest dread, each court's fragile faith, and our own longing for certainty amid life's uncertainties. Consider the physician's hands, steady and skilled, yet trembling beneath the weight of expectation. In his palms rested not only poultices and elixirs, but also the distilled hopes of a sovereign who believed power could conquer mortality. And when those hopes faltered, the healer found himself both savior and scapegoat, his life bound by the same fragile cords that tethered every human. In that duality, we glimpse our own contradictions, we seek expertise. Yet fear dependence, we crave comfort, yet dread vulnerability. Reflect on the physician's words, half Latin incantation, half simple comfort. To the uninitiated, his language was arcane. To those in need, it was a promise. But behind every diagnosis lay uncertainty, the slipperiness of humors, the unpredictability of herbs, the inscrutability of faith. In the physician's voice echoes our own modern terms, medical jargon, scientific reports, expert opinions, each intended to guide us, yet reminding us that knowledge, however advanced, still confronts the unknown. We saw kings shroud themselves in ceremonial display, hiding shivers behind collars of fur, repelling their own humanity with layers of silk. Yet, within the hush of the infirmary, those same rulers became archetypes of every person who has ever wrestled with a faltering body. Their private fear of the healer's presence mirrors our own moments of trepidation. When we step into hospitals, swab nurses, and x-ray machines, we too, like them, wonder, can I trust this stranger with my life? Will this cure save me or betray me? The physician's life in that era was woven between compassion and caution. He studied texts of ancient lore, copied recipes by candlelight, and carried secret formulas hidden in his cloak. His expertise brought relief, yet also drew suspicion. In those hidden pouches, he bore the power to help or to harm. In our lives today, we entrust our well-being to specialists, briefcases, stethoscopes, scanners, genetic profiles. Yet we guard our faith carefully, aware that even the most benevolent hand may falter. Think of the physician's midnight ministrations, slipping down empty corridors to tend secret patients in hidden wards. He moved between the chambers of power and the dungeons of despair, a silent witness to both triumph and tragedy. In that passage lies the essence of empathy, the willingness to accompany another through fear. Not as judge, but as companion. We find the same calling in caregivers today. Doctors, nurses, therapists will walk into our darkest hours and remain, offering presence when words fail. The mirror the physician held up to medieval courts also reflects our collective hope for agency in the face of mortality. Kings sought mastery over disease, investing funds in apothecaries and patronizing healers, convinced that wealth could tip the odds. Yet every remedy carried risk, and every triumph was tempered by relapse. Likewise, we invest in wellness trends, cutting-edge treatments, and preventive screenings, yearning for control. But in every triumph, we learn anew that life's unpredictability remains, reminding us to balance our plans with acceptance. Weary of our own bodies' betrayals, we have sent men and women across continents to study sciences, to master techniques, and to write protocols that promise precision. But we also send prayers skyward, hold talismans close, and whisper words of hope to ourselves in the dark. The medieval healer's dual reliance on learned texts and whispered prayers echoes in our blended trust in medicine and belief, core reliance on both RIC scans and meditation apps, on both antibiotics and affirmations. In the physician's imprisonment, we see the vulnerability of expertise itself. Stripped of tools, he turned to makeshift cures for fellow prisoners, mending broken skin with stolen herbs, easing fevers with secret teas. His compassion transcended his fall from favor. So too, in our times of crisis, natural disasters, pandemics, personal illness, we witness professionals adapting, carrying in improvised words, delivering aid from unexpected sources. The healer's creativity reminds us that true service arises not solely from titles or tools, but from the heart's commitment to alleviate suffering. And what of the king, who feared his physician even as he needed him most? His dread was not born of doubt and skill alone, but of a deeper fear that no surgeon's blade, no potion, no prayer could ultimately reclaim what nature ordained. In that fear lies our own confrontation with finitude. We dread aging faces in mirrors, faltering joints on morning walks, tests that could return unwelcome news. Yet we also honor each day lived, each breath drawn, each heartbeat's feigned insistence on continuation. The physician, at the end of our tale, stands neither condemned nor exalted, but human, flawed, compassionate, courageous in his vulnerability. He reminds us that healing is more than the removal of pain. It is an act of shared trust, of mutual surrender. The patient surrenders sovereignty of body. The healer surrenders the illusion of infallibility. In that mutual yielding, A bond forms, a bond that transcends centuries, connecting his quiet vigil by candlelight to our own moments of seeking care. So we ask ourselves, who do we trust with our pain? Where do we place our faith, in instruments or in intuition, in protocols or in presence? And how do we find peace in a body we cannot command, learning to lean not solely on our strength, but on the hands that guide us through vulnerability? These questions, posed by candle-shadowed physicians and cloaked kings, continue to reverberate in our modern clinics and living rooms. As the embers of this medieval journey grow dim, may we carry forward the physician's mirror, holding it up not to judge, but to understand. May we see our own fears reflected there, the fear of helplessness, the fear of betrayal, the fear of insignificance in the face of illness. And may we also see our resilience, the capacity to seek help, to extend compassion, to accept limits with grace. In that recognition lies our comfort that to be human is to need and to heal each other. And in the echo of the physician's presence across centuries, we find reassurance that, while bodies may falter, the bonds forged in care endure, bridging the past and present, reminding us that in vulnerability we are never alone. And now, we rest. The torches have guttered low, leaving only the soft glow of embers to trace patterns across stone walls. The whisper of distant corridors has fallen silent, and the hush settles around you like a familiar blanket. Here, at the end of our journey through candlelit chambers and fevered nights, there is nothing left to probe, calmly this gentle release into stillness. The herbs that once steamed in bubbling aldrons have cooled to faint scents drifting on the air. Rosemary, lavender, rue, their fragrances linger, soft reminders of hope and healing. But now they yield to the quiet. The vessels and vials have been set aside. The poultice is removed, and the cleaged crimson promise washed away. Even the physician's tools lie empty, their purpose fulfilled. In their absence, peace seeps into every corner. Above all, the crown sits silent, no longer a symbol of inexorable rule. It rests upon its velvet cushion, its jewels glinting only in memory. It has seen fear, faith, and fervent prayers. It has witnessed the king's trembling breath, his final confession, and the delicate balance between power and vulnerability. And now it waits, untouched, unneeded, save as a quiet emblem of lives lived beneath its weight. Whatever you feel, let it be. Perhaps a tender sadness for those who walk these halls in secret dread. Perhaps a soft gratitude for the physicians and caretakers who stood vigil through dark hours. Perhaps a flicker of recognition that we, too, carry fears no crown can banish, and hopes that cannot always be measured by poultice or prayer. In this moment, all emotions belong. There is no judgment here, calmly the hush of understanding. You have listened long, tracing the slow rhythms of medieval fear and solace. You have thought deeply about power and fragility, trust and betrayal. You may feel the echo of distant footsteps in your own mind, or the faint flutter of your heart recalling the hush of a deathbed confession. And maybe, just maybe, you have drifted toward sleep, eyes heavy, thoughts softening as the world beyond your window grows distant. That is perfectly all right. Let this story settle somewhere soft inside you, like the last page of a well-loved book, the final note of a lullaby, the fading glow of a lantern carried out into the night. Do not rush to turn another page. Do not search for grand conclusions or urgent lessons. Instead, let the images of torchlight, of trembling monarchs, of humble healers recede like clouds across the moon, gentle and undemanding. And as the night carries you further away, whether you slip into slumber or simply rest in quiet contemplation, know this: even kings were afraid. They trembled beneath their mantles of silk and fur. They questioned the hands meant to heal them. They confessed their deepest regrets in whispered tones. Yet they carried on, throughout rituals of bloodletting and prayers before shrines. Through prison cells and hidden cures, through pain and repentance, they carried on. As we do, our fears may not be of leeches or poison chalices, but they are no less real: the fear of illness, of betrayal, of endings we cannot control. Yet, like those medieval souls, we find ways to cope, to seek help, to whisper prayers, to offer confession, to hold hands with those who tend to our wounds. We weave our own rituals of care and trust, aware that vulnerability is neither sin nor weakness, but the very thread that binds us together. For now, that is enough. Let the crown rest. Let the ointments cool. Let the words fade into the silence of your own breath. And when morning comes, you may awaken with new clarity, or with the gentle glow of a dream not yet forgotten. But for tonight, simply be. Allow the peace of this quiet hour to cradle you, as the physician's hand rattled the king's last moment, and as every heart seeks the soft embrace of understanding. Good night.